huh? I mean, the work that they do is extraordinary. And that cake in the lobby is really something. And to the mayor, I would just say that we very much appreciate our working relationship with you. And the mayor also served on our opioid task force, which I'll talk a little more about in a minute. But one of the fundamental tenets that Karen Polito and I have tried to bring into our administration is this notion that a strong Commonwealth is 351 strong cities and towns. No one, when they get asked how things are going, answers that question by how they think things are going on Beacon Hill. They answer that question based on how they think things are going in their home, in their neighborhood, in their community. And if things aren't going well in their home, their neighborhood, and their community, then what's going on Beacon Hill or what's going on in some other place in Massachusetts loses a lot of its relevance. And because of that, we've tried to make our primary focus on working with our colleagues in the legislature, many of whom are here today, thanks for joining, and our colleagues in local government to help people max on their strengths and work to mitigate or improve on whatever they may see as their problems going forward. And that's translated into a whole series of approaches to governing. And one of them starts with the way we choose to build our budgets. And over the course of the last 3 years, again, working with our colleagues in the legislature, we basically started with funding on unrestricted local aid and on education aid, and then everything else has sort of come after that. And I think for a lot of folks in local government, that's meant a lot more predictability for them with respect to their own budgeting activities, and a sense that the state is pretty serious about trying to find a way to collaborate with them and to ensure that if state tax revenue goes up by 2%, then local aid is going to go up by at least that much as well. And that's a group effort. That doesn't happen because the governor or lieutenant governor thinks it's a good idea. It happens because we get to work collaboratively with the legislative group that's willing to see things the same way we do on that one. And I think you should give the folks who are here from the legislature a round of applause because they've been terrific partners on that. I also do want to spend a minute on two other local initiatives. One is, I worked in local government, I worked in state government. I was in the cabinet of Bill Weld and Paul Salucci in the 90s, and I served as a member of my board of selectmen in Swampscott, which is where I live. And I've seen how this movie works from both sides. And one of the things I learned when I served in local government is the state historically has a tendency to just say, do this, we're not going to give you any money, have a nice day. And that kind of hurts, actually, if you're in the local level and you're trying to figure out how to make stuff work. So what we did was we said, here's a whole menu of best practices. And you can choose to work on some of them or not. If you choose to work on them, we'll give you technical assistance, which will be funded by the Commonwealth, again, in conjunction with the legislature. And if you work on those, you can get points when you bid on state grants. And we did this early on in our administration with no idea about whether or not anybody in local government would pursue it. But as I stand here today, out of the 351 cities and towns, about 320 of them have voluntarily signed up to work on at least one best practice, and many are working on more than that. There are about 750 best practices in all that cities and towns have been working on. Again, with technical support and assistance from the Commonwealth. And this is translated into some really important initiatives. In some cases, it's translated into bond upgrades for cities and towns. In some cases, it's the first time they've been able to figure out how to create a regional approach to education policy, or emergency management services, or public safety, or library services, or a whole series of other things that they were never quite able to get over the line. In other cases, it translated into policies around environmental policy, downtown development, economic development. And for us, it was this amazing learning experience where we got a sense about which issues around the Commonwealth were the ones people really wanted us to drill on and to work on. And so that led to a 200-page municipal modernization bill that took years, 50 years worth of old rules, requirements, goo, that got in the way of cities and towns' ability to do their job. And again, working with the legislature, got that passed, and the Mass Municipal Association called it the most important advancement in state municipal finance law that had been passed in the past 50 years. And usually when you have an event at the State House to talk about local government, am I doing something with this? No. Just checking. Usually when you have an event at the State House and you invite a lot of local officials to it, if you're not giving anybody any money, it's pretty hard to get anybody to come. But in this particular case, we had over 100 cities and towns show up for the bill signing on this because it made their life and their ability to do their job so much easier. In addition to that, we also figured out that there were all kinds of small bridges all over the Commonwealth, owned by local community. Everybody thinks bridges, they think state bridges, right? And we've probably repaired and rehabilitated about 80 of them since we took office. But one of the things we learned when we got into this whole program around best practices was that most of the bridges in Massachusetts are actually owned by cities and towns. And sometimes they can use the Chapter 90 money they get from us and other funding they get to fix and repair them, and sometimes they can't. So we created a small bridge program that gave cities and towns the ability to bid on that if they wanted to do work associated with fixing their bridges. In addition to that, we learned that a lot of folks had issues with sidewalks. And so we created another program called the Complete Street Program, which makes it possible for cities and towns to bid on those grant funds and to combine them with their own money or with Chapter 90 funding to redo a lot of the public ways that they would like to incorporate sidewalks into. Bike paths, another one that came up as part of this conversation. As a result, over the course of 4 years, we'll probably spend $100 million, no joke, $100 million on connecting and improving bike paths all over the Commonwealth of Mass. And these are things that come from this ongoing, constant dialogue between us and the Commonwealth cities and towns about what are the things we can do to help you get better. The decision to put the DUA building in downtown, that came about as a result of a series of conversations with the mayor. The decision with the DA's office, same thing. The conversation we're starting with the Christos property, the Enterprise Center. These are things where that ongoing, constant conversation gives us the ability to figure out what's really on people's minds, which you don't get through sort of the once-in-a-while type conversations, and then to actually create a conversation that can translate into something that will help people move their community forward. The Skill Capital Grant Program that Massasoit got a grant on, Brockton High School got a grant on, and Southeastern Voc Tech got a grant on. That one came about through a series of conversations with small businesses and local businesses as we were doing some of these community visits who said, there's all these jobs. If people just had the right skills, they have to get credentialed for them. There are people who are actually in a position to provide this kind of skill base for people, but they don't in many cases have the right equipment to do it. So we said, fine. We put together this program. The legislature, God bless you, funded it. And we've put about $40 million out to vocational and technical schools, community colleges, other skill building organizations, almost all of which is tied to employers who say, yeah, if you guys invest in this, we will invest alongside you, and we will be able to hire the folks who come out of those programs and give them good jobs in our communities so that they can be successful and grow and develop. And I think one of the things we've tried to do day in and day out is work on this assumption that we as the Commonwealth can be a great leverage for a lot of the work that's going on at the local and regional level, and not the other way around. It's not supposed to be about us telling people this is what we want you to do. It should be about us saying, where are the places and the spaces and the opportunities, whether they're environmental policy, transportation, education, economic development, public safety, where we can actually help you solve your problems. One of the big things we heard from almost everybody about transportation was we weren't doing a good job with basic maintenance of our roads, all right? So over the course of the past 3 years, we've repaved 2,000 miles of road in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I want you to think about that for a minute. We've also heard from many people that we weren't doing enough with respect to the way we handled the stitching that we can provide on downtown development and housing projects. So we significantly upped our investment in the MassWorks program, which is where the Enterprise Center grant came from. But that MassWorks program is the single best tool we have to help people put the finishing touch on a development initiative. Sometimes it's utility work, sometimes it's sidewalks, sometimes it's a parking garage. But it's basically this great program that's been around state government for a long time, but we really brought it to the fore and put some additional resources behind it. Because over and over again, what we were hearing from folks at the local level is we're this close, we just need somebody to help us do X, and then we'll be able to figure out a way to follow through and deliver on it. We did the same thing with our housing initiative. Significantly expanded our investment in housing, and because of what we were hearing from folks in local communities, we created a workforce housing program. So that our housing program wasn't just about affordable housing, wasn't just about public housing, but was also about working in many cases with private developers and others to do more workforce housing. Because the big message we were getting is young families, middle income people, those are the folks who in many cases are getting priced out of our communities. That's where we need you to go forward. And that then led to a long set of conversations, literally, that have been going on for almost a year, about what are we going to do to create more housing in the Commonwealth of Mass. More housing for students going to work, joining the workforce, more housing for young families, more housing for middle-income families, more housing for seniors, more supported housing for seniors. How are we going to do this, given that historically this conversation has just been a brawl between state government, which wants to do one thing, local government, which wants to do another, and local developers and local residents who want to chase a different one. Now, we could have just filed the same kind of bill everybody's filed historically, and it would have, kind of gone nowhere and done nothing. But instead, what we did was we literally had a series of conversations that lasted almost a year with everybody who plays in this space. It's led to this housing choices bill that we filed last week. And what we did was we said, we need to give locals more tools. We don't need to tell them what to do, but we need to give them more tools. So there's a big piece of that legislation which gives locals more tools. Second thing we said is we need to put some financial resources behind that. We have a bond bill pending. I'm quite sure all the members of the legislature are going to pass the day after you come out in January. You can do it after you get the criminal justice impact, right? And put some of our own resources behind it. So it's $10 million a year coming from, in addition to the housing bond stuff coming behind that. And the third thing we said was, and we have to figure out some way to do this on terms that will make it possible for folks in the development community to feel like they have the predictability they need to move forward. So we had an event to file the bill, and we had mayors and city managers and city councilors and zoning folks and planning folks and housing developers and real estate folks and affordable housing developers. We had everybody you could think of standing behind us because we put the time into figuring out what the path forward could be on this that might actually translate into 135,000 new units of housing over the course of the next 6 years or so. And I think in some ways, that's because we start with this notion that if we can find the common ground on Beacon Hill, the common ground in communities, the common ground between and among the various players, if we listen for it, if we work on the proposition here that this isn't a contest about who wins today's food fight that will be on the news tonight, but is actually an attempt to find the places and spaces where people agree over a larger arching goal, which is to try to find a way to create more housing in Massachusetts so people can afford to be here. Maybe there's a path to success. And all of this for us always works on this notion, stronger, better communities. And in different parts of Massachusetts, it's different. In gateway cities, it's different than what it is in Western Mass, which is different than what it is along the coast. We reinvigorated the Seaport Council because we have 75 coastal communities in Massachusetts, which are really struggling to figure out what to do with their waterfronts, for all kinds of reasons. We worked with the legislature to get additional funding to build the last mile for high-speed internet for 58 communities in Western Mass that don't have it. I want you to think about how hard it is to actually attract young people, keep young people, attract businesses, create a future in this day and age if you don't have high-speed internet. I went and visited a bunch of these businesses. And you had restaurants literally running dial-up on a Friday or Saturday night to keep track of everything. Tables that were being used, bills, meals, the bar, the whole 9 yards. So if the dial-up goes poof, then it used to happen a lot. You're screwed. Right? So there's a reason why those 58 communities didn't have it. It's really hard and frustrating to figure out how to get it done. But again, by partnering with the communities, partnering with a number of the telecom and cable companies, and bringing our resources to bear and some of theirs, we got plans in place for 52 of the 58, and we'll get the last 6 done. And on the gateway community piece, it's not the same answer everywhere, because they're not the same. But for the most part, it's about downtown strategies, greening of those communities. We've planted 10,000 trees in Gateway City since we took office. I think you're on the hook to plant about 2,400, Mr. Mayor. Good luck with that.
Hey, the first 800 are almost in.
See, exactly. But it's not just about planting them, right? You got to figure out where you're going to plant them, where you get the best opportunity to create the right kind of space for it, and then you need to have partnerships with people at the local level who are actually going to take care of them. So you plant them and they grow and good things happen. And I think in many ways that's the way we think about this role and this responsibility. Working with our colleagues, whatever your particular political affiliation might be, to build strong communities from one end of Massachusetts to the other. Be tough on the issues, soft on the people, and recognize that everybody's not always supposed to agree. You know, my mom and dad canceled each other out for 60 years in elections. You know, she, God rest her soul, was a Democrat, my dad's a Republican, laser light show across the dinner table every night. They were having a conversation, and I learned a lot from listening to my parents talk. And one of the biggest things I learned is no one has the answer to everything. And the people who lose in this conversation, and I don't mean lose, win, lose, I mean lose opportunity, are the ones who don't listen. And the ones who don't... And the ones who can't or won't choose to hear what the other person's point of view is. Now, we have a pretty open-door policy in our administration, and I'm pretty sure folks who deal with us would say that we try to be as solution-oriented as we can within the framework of the finite system we live in, whether it's regulatory finite, statutory finite, or financially finite. But we also are big believers that if you keep talking and working this stuff, you can find a path to success. And I would argue the opioid issue is another one where we have a long way to go, but with a ton of work by a lot of people, we are making progress. Now, after 15 years of double-digit increases, and I happen to consider this to be one of the most important healthy community issues of all, because you're not going to find a community in Massachusetts that hasn't been hit by this thing. After 15 years of double-digit growth, and sometimes 20 and 30 and 40%, the prescriptions, overdoses, and deaths in Massachusetts, every single year for 15 years. Every year. Awful. I said when we signed the first legislation on this, a collaborative effort with our colleagues in the legislature and elsewhere, that I'd never seen anything with so much negative momentum. And here we are, 9 months to 17, and for the first time in 15 years, deaths are down, prescriptions are down, and because of the availability of Narcan, again, on a collaborative, collective basis, overdoses have flattened out and nowhere near as many people are dying. Now, that's good news. The bad news is we still have a really long way to go, which is why we filed what I call sort of the second act on this opioid issue, which is a piece of legislation that's designed to do a bunch of things, and I'm, again, looking forward to working with my colleagues in the legislature on this one. But the big piece was to try to create some structure around the aftercare piece. Because right now, if you're a family dealing with this, it's really hard to figure out what works and what doesn't, and where you go, and how you should help your family member, and all that. There are a lot of folks in the addiction community who've done great work for a really long time, in many cases ignored by the rest of healthcare, okay? But the truth is, people believe recovery coaches are a good idea. So do I. What is it? There's no definition for it. Well, let's create a credentialing process for that, and then make sure people who do this get paid for their work, and we track how they perform. Same thing goes with a lot of the counseling services that are supposed to support medication-assisted treatment. And let's figure out what the real evidence base is here, so that families and people who are dealing with these issues have some place to go, the same way we do with congestive heart failure, or diabetes, or heart disease, or most other chronic conditions. Because this is not an issue that's going to be a quick fix solve. This is going to be one of these ones that we're going to have to work on and battle year after year after year for an extended, sustained period of time. We didn't get here overnight. We don't get out overnight. But again, it's one of these issues that requires a collaborative and comprehensive, bite by bite, day by day approach to solving it. And the final thing I would just say is, in this day and age, where so much of what happens in public life and in politics is about division, I am very grateful that I get to live and work in a state where at every level of government and in every community, there are good people trying to do the right thing, working hard, avoiding the character assassination and the foolishness that in many cases some people call political dialogue, and trying to move their community and this great Commonwealth forward. It has been an enormous blessing for me and for the folks on my team, for Karen, and for my family to be part of this great democracy that people built here in the great state of Massachusetts. Thank you.